On October 15, 2008, a quiet neighborhood in French Valley, California, became the scene of a crime designed to deceive. A newly married couple failed to show up for work. Jan-Pietrzak never reported for duty, and Quiana Jenkins-Pietrzak never arrived at her job. When repeated attempts to reach them went unanswered, concerned co-workers from both workplaces grew alarmed. Separately, each contacted police, and a welfare check was requested. The responding officer found the front door standing open. Inside, a purse lay overturned near the entrance, its contents scattered across the floor. The smell of gasoline mixed with natural gas, as if someone had tried to erase every trace of what happened here. But the plan had failed. Officers moving through the home found Jan and Quiana bound on the living room floor. Both had been shot to death. The house had been torn apart, drawers emptied, cabinets left open, valuables missing. Small fires had been set throughout, but none had spread. Then investigators noticed something stranger still. Racial slurs covered the walls and mirrors. With Quiana black and Jan white, the message seemed obvious. This looked like a hate crime. The vandalism, the fires, the chaos, every detail pointed the same direction. But seasoned detectives know crime scenes don't always reveal the truth. Sometimes they reveal the story the killer once told. Working alongside NCIS, Riverside County investigators examined every room, not just what had disappeared, but what had been left behind. One item stood out: Jan's Marine Corps sea bag, packed with equipment from his years of service, untouched. If strangers had ransacked the house for valuables, why leave this behind? A civilian burglar might have taken it. Another Marine wouldn't have needed to. For the first time, investigators considered that the killers might know military life, and perhaps know Jan himself. Then came a second clue. Quiana's ATM card had been used after the murders. Surveillance footage from a machine near Camp Pendleton showed someone withdrawing cash, face hidden behind a blue bandana, hands covered in distinctive gloves. The image wasn't clear enough to identify him, but the location and disguise pointed investigators toward Jan's military circle. Detectives began interviewing the Marines who'd served with him. Had he clashed with anyone recently? One name kept coming up: 20-year-old Lance Corporal Tyrone Miller. Miller served under Jan's supervision, and several Marines described friction between the two. Personality conflicts weren't enough for an arrest, but before detectives could dig further, an unexpected event pushed Miller into the spotlight. Days after the murders, one day before Jan and Quiana's funeral, Miller was shot outside a movie theater. He claimed it was a drive-by. To investigators already watching him, the timing was impossible to ignore. Brought in for questioning, Miller insisted he'd been home the night of the murders. Then detectives mentioned his cell phone. They could verify his location through tower records if needed. His confidence faded almost immediately. His story shifted. Maybe he hadn't been home. Maybe he'd been out driving with friends. It wasn't a confession, but it was the first crack. Then came a question that sounded almost casual. What did he and his friends usually wear at night? Blue bandanas. The same color seen in the ATM footage. Miller also admitted to owning Nike Air Force Ones, matching another detail detectives had been quietly tracking. None of it proved he was a killer. Together, it was enough for a search warrant. When officers arrived at his home, no one answered. After forcing entry, they encountered something veteran investigators said they'd never seen before: Miller using his own toddler daughter as a human shield. Officers removed the child safely and began searching the house. Within minutes, the case changed forever. Quiana's ATM card sat in plain view. Nearby, her jewelry, spent shell casings, and Jan's Marine Corps dress blues hanging in a closet. Then the weapons. Among them, the gun that would be identified as the murder weapon. Blue bandanas matching the surveillance footage. The same distinctive gloves. Forensic testing delivered the final piece: DNA linking Tyrone Miller directly to the crime scene. The case that began as a staged hate crime had become something else entirely. Faced with the evidence, Miller's denials collapsed. He admitted being inside the house, but claimed the murders weren't planned, that a robbery had spiraled out of control. Whether anyone believed him no longer mattered. Before the interview ended, Miller gave investigators 3 names: Emrys John, Kevin Cox, and Kason Sykes. All 3 were fellow Marines. All 3 would eventually admit to being inside the Pietrzak home. But as their stories were compared, a new mystery emerged. All four acknowledged being there. None admitted pulling the trigger. Investigators now knew who had entered the house. The harder question was why. Months of forensic work, interviews, and testimony would eventually piece together what happened inside. The four Marines hadn't chosen the house at random. Prosecutors say they arrived prepared for a home invasion, faces hidden behind blue bandanas, aiming to rob the couple. But they couldn't get inside unnoticed, so they used someone Jan trusted, Private Kevin Cox. Jan recognized him and opened the door, though not entirely unguarded. He answered holding a knife. It didn't matter. The moment Cox was inside, the others forced their way in behind him. Weapons drawn, Jan and Quiana were quickly overpowered, bound, and held while the group searched the house for cash and valuables. They found far less than they expected. Frustration turned to violence. Unable to find the money they believed was hidden inside, the group demanded access to the couple's finances. Under relentless abuse, Quiana gave up the PIN to her ATM card, the same card later found in Tyrone Miller's home, the same card traced to the withdrawal near Camp Pendleton. What came next was the most horrifying part of the case. Trial evidence established that Quiana was sexually assaulted while Jan was forced to watch, the assault continuing for an extended period before both were executed. Bound, shot, left where investigators would find them. But the killers weren't finished. Before leaving, they tried to rewrite the story themselves, scrawling racial slurs across the walls and mirrors, setting fires in an attempt to destroy the forensic evidence, dousing the house in gasoline and natural gas, hoping it would all burn. The fires failed, and the scene built to mislead investigators became the very thing that exposed the killers. Every attempt to cover their tracks left another one behind. Digging into Miller's background, detectives found more lies. His drive-by shooting wasn't one. He'd been shot accidentally by one of his own accomplices during an unrelated robbery. Prosecutors also presented a pattern of home invasions Miller had allegedly carried out before the murders. Speculation surfaced that he blamed Jan for blocking a promotion, though investigators never substantiated that claim. What they could prove was damaging enough. The robbery had been planned. So had the cover-up, and every effort to hide the truth had only strengthened the case against the men responsible. Even with arrests made, the legal battle was only beginning. John and Quiana were buried together, with full military honors at Riverside National Cemetery, 9 days after their murders. A 21-gun salute echoed across the grounds for a man who had survived combat in Iraq, only to be killed in his own home by men who wore the same uniform. For the families, the funeral closed one chapter. For prosecutors, it opened another. 4 defendants, multiple confessions, conflicting accounts, a mountain of forensic evidence, and one question each man seemed determined to answer differently: who fired the fatal shots? It would take nearly 5 years before the first trial began. Tyrone Miller, Emrys John, and Kevin Cox were tried together in 2013. Over 4 months, jurors heard investigators and forensic experts reconstruct the case step by step. The staged hate crime scene, the ATM withdrawal, the evidence recovered from Miller's home, the DNA that tied him to the murders. The defense challenged the timeline. The physical evidence answered it. After less than 3 days of deliberation, guilty on every major count, Kason Sykes was tried separately the following year. Same result. The convictions held all 4 men legally responsible for the murders of Jan Pietrzak and Quiana Jenkins-Pietrzak. But sentencing revealed how jurors weighed each man's role. Emrys John was identified as the gunman. Tyrone Miller was additionally convicted for his role in the sexual assault. Kason Sykes was convicted of sexual assault and forcible sexual penetration. For Miller, John, and Sykes, the jury returned a sentence of death. Kevin Cox, whom jurors concluded played a lesser role, limited to helping the group gain entry, was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. For the families, years of uncertainty had finally produced answers. But one question lingered. Would those sentences ever be carried out? Cox began serving his life sentence at Chuckawalla Valley State Prison. Miller, John, and Sykes were transferred to San Quentin to await execution. For many families, a death sentence feels like the final chapter. In California, it's often just the start of another long wait, appeals stretching on for years, sometimes decades, leaving families suspended between a verdict and its outcome. In 2019, the case shifted again. Governor Gavin Newsom announced a statewide moratorium on executions. The convictions stood. The sentences stood. No one was released. But executions were suspended for as long as the moratorium remains in effect. Today, Miller, John, and Sykes remain on California's death row. The sentences still stand. They simply haven't been carried out. For Jan's mother, the tragedy carried a particular irony. When her son enlisted, she'd braced herself for the risks of war, for the possibility that combat might take his life. She never imagined he would survive Iraq only to be murdered in his own home, not by strangers, but by fellow Marines, men he'd worked beside, men he trusted enough to open the door for. Quiana's family lost just as much. She'd dedicated her career to helping others, was preparing for medical school, and had only just begun building a future with the man she loved. Their first home was supposed to be the start of something. Instead, it became where that future ended, 68 days into their marriage. Nearly 2 decades later, the evidence hasn't changed. The convictions still stand, and the crime scene built to mislead investigators has become a case study in how the smallest inconsistency can unravel even the most calculated deception. The untouched sea bag, the failed fires, the ATM withdrawal, the blue bandana, the stolen jewelry, the DNA. Each clue, small on its own, formed a chain that exposed the truth. The killers tried to manufacture a hate crime. Instead, investigators uncovered a planned home invasion carried out by men from the victim's own military unit. In the end, the greatest threat to Jan and Quiana didn't come from strangers. It came from people they already knew, people who exploited that trust and believed they could destroy the evidence before anyone learned what really happened. They were wrong. Because experienced investigators refused to take the scene at face value, every attempt to hide the truth became evidence against the men who tried to hide it. Today, Jan and Quiana rest together at Riverside National Cemetery. Their story is a reminder that justice isn't measured only by arrests or convictions. It's measured by the willingness to keep searching when the evidence doesn't quite fit, and the persistence to find the truth, no matter how carefully someone tries to bury it. If their story stayed with you, consider leaving a few words for Jan's mother. And for Quiana's parents, Roy and Glenna Jenkins. No family should carry a loss like this alone.